Very good afternoon to one and all, those who are joining us, are still joining us, and those who have come online for this very interesting webinar. My name is Ankita Puri, and I am the Marketing and Corporate Relations Personnel in the University of Manchester. It's my pleasure to have Mr. Walid Namane to be the presenter of this webinar, which is going to talk about the potential future trajectories of COVID-19. To give you a quick brief about him, Walid provides economic and geopolitical risk analysis on North Africa and the Middle East for EMIR. He also undertakes bespoke consultancy engagements for EMIR's clients in the region. Prior to joining EMIR, Walid worked as a political risk analyst for two UAE-based advisory firms where he managed consulting and research projects and produced intelligence reports on the economic and geopolitical dynamics in the region. Walid is currently completing his PhD thesis at the Center for Diplomatic and Strategic Studies in Paris on the role of political Islam in the Turkish foreign policy in the Middle East. He has written extensively on the region's geopolitical challenges and is a native Arabic and a French speaker. So on this note, Walid, I pass it on to you. Please, you can take it further with your presentations.
Thank you, Ankita, for the kind presentation. Hi, everyone. I hope that you are doing fine and being safe in these extraordinary times. So what I'm going to do, just to give you a sense about the next 20 minutes or so, is that I'll try to paint a picture of the current COVID-19 dynamics in the region and through 2020 and through 2021, and how the different scenarios, the potential different scenarios, will unfold based on the statistics of COVID-19. At the same time, I'm going to look at the business outlook for the region for Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 markets, and touch on the policy responses aiming to contain COVID-19 in the region, and with a particular focus on GCC countries. And at the end, I'm going to talk about the oil crisis and how it will impact also the businesses here in the region. So the first question I would like to answer is, what are the main trends now regarding COVID-19 dynamics in the region? The first thing to say is that the region is not homogeneous regarding COVID-19 cases. So there are many changes between countries, as you can see in the slide. We have countries with high level of cases, such as Turkey, and another country with high level of fatalities, which is Iran. And this also goes to all countries. We have countries that they have high level of healthcare capacities, and also the region differ from a political, economic, and geopolitical aspect. So, which means that some countries have high capacity, institutional capacity, and economic health to deal with the crisis. And unfortunately, a lot of countries also don't have this kind of means and tools to deal with the crisis. And if we take a look to this pie chart, we can understand that, as I said earlier, Turkey represents a lot of cases in the Middle East, while Iran represents a lot of cases and as fatalities. And way below that, we have the GCC countries, which the cases represent there around 70% of the global cases in the MENA region, which is the MENA region plus Turkey. And the misleading thing about these numbers that we are hearing every day from the news, the newspapers and social media is bombarding us in a constant way with numbers of COVID-19. And this is misleading, and it's only give us one maybe dimension of the whole picture in the Middle East. The misleading thing about this is that there are countries that they have low testing capabilities, and we are talking about countries with also some limited economic tools. They cannot increase testing, and when they cannot increase testing, it means that the number of confirmed cases of COVID-19 is going to be low. For example, if if you take the rest of MENA, it represents only 6%. And this is not true, because a lot of countries, they cannot accelerate testing because they don't have the money, they don't have the sophistication of the healthcare system. So a business leader or even someone who is interested in the impact of COVID-19 on the region should bear in mind and should keep in mind the fact that the picture is misleading, and you need really to go by country, each country, and try to understand the trends. And why I'm saying that, because since it's difficult to get the full picture of the region, it's very important to get one step back and talk about, maybe think about the different scenarios of COVID-19 and identify the potential trajectories of COVID-19 dynamics in the next 6 months or even 2 years. So when we talk about COVID-19 scenarios, we have 3 scenarios. We have the upside scenario, which is an optimistic scenario, and also an unlikely scenario. In this scenario, we think that countries will find a treatment easily or in a very short time to COVID-19, which is not the case for this current situation now. And when they find this treatment, I'm talking about the treatment and not a vaccine, because there's a big difference between the two. And if there is an effective treatment, it means that the countries or the states in the region will swiftly ease the social restriction and ease the lockdowns. And this means that the business activity will pick up more rapidly, and we can see a V-shaped recovery in the region. However, I have to say it again, this is the upside scenario, which is the unlikely scenario. The second scenario is the base case scenario. When I say base case scenario, it means that it's the likely scenario that we believe in EMIR, that it's going to unfold and that we are going through it right now. In this scenario, we think that the ease of restrictions is going to stay with us for the second half of the year until 2021. At the same time, we're going to see a gradual opening of businesses and gradual return to a normal life. However, this doesn't mean that business operations or the economic situation will improve, dramatically. We're thinking that businesses will still suffer a lot of economic damage. You will have a lot of job losses, and you will have a lot of, let's say, bankruptcy and a lot of banking problems. But the business impact is this: companies will start to see a rebound in revenues, and demand will pick up starting from the second half of 2020 and going through 2021. Well, the other scenario, the third and last scenario, is the downside scenario. And the most important thing here that I need to stress to everyone is, like, the downside scenario has also high level of probability, which is in our calculations around 40%. And why I'm saying that, we need first to understand that this scenario looks similar to the base case scenario, the likely scenario, which means that businesses that we are going to see somehow an ease of restriction, business will start to pick up. A lot of businesses will open with only 25-30%, let's say, capacity, and they will implement very strict health measures and everything. But the main event that could take place, and this is according to scientific research, is that the pandemic will have a second wave, and this is very important. A second wave means that COVID-19 means that government will be obliged to tighten restrictions after they ease restrictions. So by staying between tightening and opening up, we'll have a cyclical, let's say, path for economies and for businesses. And then this situation will increase uncertainty regarding the businesses and their strategies and how they manage to do it. And this could stay with us for 1 year until two years, until we find a vaccine. So this is very disturbing. This scenario is very disturbing for governments and very disturbing also for businesses. Now, when we look to this slide, the plan and exit strategy, we can figure out that we are in a phase 2, right? A few days ago, we were in phase 1, which means robust social restrictions here in UAE, extensive testing, and healthcare revamp. Now we are going easily through we are going in a gradual way through the partial easing of restrictions, increasing testing, and business are being open partially, as I mentioned earlier. This is what we are going through. And when we try to apply this to corporate revenues, which means the business outlook of the base case scenario and its impact on the businesses around the region, we can say that let's talk about the start of 2020, right? We have Q1 in 2020, the first months, they were okay. And it feels it was like ages back ago, I don't know why. So yeah, at the end of 2019, I was doing presentation in Burj Al Arab for our commercial leaders, members, and we were very optimistic about 2020, the Expo, and how Saudi Arabia is going to increase significantly its expenditure to non-oil sectors and how this will help pick up consumption, consumer confidence, and all the economic aspects of the non-oil sectors. But now we are talking about, we are in a very different situation, and a lot of companies are just trying to survive and to ensure business continuity. I'm talking about this because just to let you know how things dramatically changed even at the economic planning scenarios and policy. So Q1 was okay in 2020, as I said earlier. Q2 is going to be the most dramatic business quarter in your lifetimes. You will never maybe see a bad Q2 in terms of business and economic damage as the one that we are going through now. And Q3 is going to be as bad as Q2 in terms of revenues, in terms of economic damage and losses. And maybe we're going to see, I'm not going to call it a recovery, but a flattening out of the curve at the end of 2020. And businesses will start but by 2021 to recover slowly. So this brings us to the next slide. So I know that everyone is thinking now, there are a lot of information. And as I mentioned earlier, we have this specificities about countries dealing with the COVID-19, the economic collapse, the economic crisis, and how governments are trying to navigate this during these hard times. The one thing that we always in EMIR try to advise commercial leaders of businesses and even individuals interested in their financial future is to look through a resilience index. We created this resilience index to help people to see, of course, it means that all economies going to suffer in the region, but the resilience index help you identify which markets are going to make it through and recover after COVID-19. And don't get me wrong, when you see UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar being within tier 1 countries, it doesn't mean they not get hurt. Everyone is going to suffer from huge economic impact from COVID-19 and also the oil crisis linked to COVID-19. But it means these countries have different tools, have deep pockets and proactive policies that can help them mitigate the risk at some point. And if we take a closer look to this, we can divide countries by tiers, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. For tier 1 countries, you have Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait. The main things between these countries is the fact that they've been proactive regarding to deal with COVID-19 outbreak. They implemented robust social restriction measures, and you do remember how the UAE was one among the first countries to implement travel restrictions back in late January. And at the same time, these countries have deep pockets. They have a good fiscal health, which means that they can spend money and they can stimulate the economy, and this will offset the COVID-19 impact on their economies and private consumption. And at the same time, these countries have good testing capabilities regarding in their healthcare system, and this is proven by the low fatality rates. If you compare these countries with other Middle Eastern and North African countries, the fatality rates from COVID-19 is around maybe 1% in these countries, and this is very low compared even to the global level, which is 3.5%. And then we go to tier 2 markets, and in tier 2 markets we have two different groups. So we have Bahrain and Oman. So Bahrain and Oman are part of the GCC region. They have good COVID-19 testing capabilities. They have good healthcare system. They also implemented robust and very very good policies regarding the containment of COVID-19 outbreak. But these countries, they have one major difference with tier 1 countries. Bahrain and Oman are highly indebted, and they don't have the deep pockets that Saudi Arabia, Qatar, or UAE have. For example, if you compare Saudi Arabia, which has like around $500 billion of financial resources, Bahrain has only $17 billion. Oman also has around $20 billion. So these countries, they will spend a lot of money, and we're gonna see that when we touch on the economic measure of all these countries. They spent a lot of money on economic stimulus, which represents maybe 30% of their GDP in a way, because they are trying to stimulate the economy and avoid the huge impact of COVID-19 and deal with it. But at the same time, this means that their current account deficit and budget deficit will increase significantly. And at some point, these countries will have two options, Bahrain and Oman, to go to the IMF to seek international financial support, or to go to their neighbors in the region and ask for financial support so they can make it through and reduce the impact of COVID-19 on their economies. Meanwhile, we have Turkey, Egypt, Morocco, Jordan, Tunisia, and Algeria. While Turkey is a very sophisticated economy, it has also a funding problem and suffer from a high political, let's say, issues and polarization regarding the role of President Erdogan. In the regional level, Turkey also is involved in several geopolitical disputes. It is involved in Libya, in Syria. Also, it has now very bad, let's say, relationship with the European Union, and it's also trying to increase its military presence in the Eastern Mediterranean, which is a geopolitical game regarding the gas fields in that region. Egypt has been the best performing economy in the last few years, with economic growth around 6 and 5%. However, Egypt has also a lot of financial vulnerabilities and will also seek international financial support, and also has high unemployment rates. And this is also work for Morocco, Jordan, Tunisia, and Algeria, with the exception for Algeria, which decided not to ask to request any foreign financial assistance in the next few months. And now we have the tier 3 markets. So the tier 3 markets are the countries that are going to suffer the most from COVID-19 outbreak. And the business outlook doesn't look really well for these countries. Iran, which suffers under the American sanction and isolation, has suffered, as I said earlier, is one of the main hotspots for COVID-19 outbreak. Lebanon has a severe economic and social problems. People are in the streets they've been in the streets in the last few days trying to push the government to ease the restrictions so they can go back to business. Beirut also is seeking foreign financial assistance from the IMF. Iraq and Libya are in a very bad shape. Both countries suffer from a very reduced institutional capacity. Their political systems are fragmented, and the government cannot control all of the territory, which means that they have very deteriorated healthcare systems. Political stability is very low, and private consumption and the business sentiment will be really incredibly hit by COVID-19. So all these countries now this is the business outlook of these countries. Now, what I would like to talk about is what are the different policy announcements that we are seeing in these countries. And if we can start by tier one countries, which are Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, and Qatar, we can see that the economic measure represents a good portion of all their policy measures. And this is very important because these countries were very proactive in allocating huge amounts of money, trying to save their economies and trying to keep liquidity, trying also to boost the confidence in their economies, to bring more foreign investment. Social restrictions also were very well implemented, and they had very robust social policy measures to keep people from out of the streets and try to contain the COVID-19 outbreak. Meanwhile, these countries also have been decreasing spending and implementing a lot of spending cuts that we can cover in the next slides. For tier two countries, you see that the economic measures are not that big. And here we have a big group of countries. And social restrictions were very important policy measures, but most of them were only partial social restrictions in Morocco, in Algeria, in Egypt, in Tunisia, which means that the government were afraid of having a total lockdown, like what we've seen here in UAE or in Kuwait or any other tier one countries, because they know that the population, that there are a lot of people with middle and low income wages that needs to go to work in maybe in the private sector or in the black market because they need the money to survive. And these countries couldn't implement like total lockdowns because if they do, they will face civil unrest, protests, and maybe instability. They also implemented economic measures, but most of the economic measures were not big because these countries suffer from like the lack or very reduced financial means and resources. At the same time, they implemented fiscal spending decrease, which means fiscal cuts more than the tier one countries because they don't have the money. So that's why they're trying to reduce the spending. And the last slide on the policy announcement is for tier three countries. As I said earlier, those are the countries they're going to suffer the most from COVID-19. And I'm talking about Iran, Lebanon, Libya, Yemen, and Iraq. So in these countries, you see that the economic measures were very weak, simply because these countries, they don't have the financial capacity to spend. At the same time, social restrictions represent a big portion of their policy announcement. However, we need to take a closer look to the social restrictions because the effectiveness of these social restrictions could be arguably discussed, because they don't have the means, these countries don't have the means to implement robust like social measures because their governments are weak. So even if they are announced like social restrictions, it doesn't mean that the streets were empty and that the business closed and that everyone was at home. So, and from there, we can now discuss the economic measures in details. For example, you can see that the biggest portion of economic measures are in the tier one countries like UAE, Saudi Arabia, and even Kuwait. Even despite it's from tier one countries, it didn't spend a lot of money for the moment. So you see that UAE has now allocated like $70 billion, Saudi Arabia $45 billion, and other countries also, even Turkey spent $27 billion. However, the main economic measures touched on four points. The first one is to increase liquidity and reduce interest rates. These are very important policy measures because when you have a total lockdown or very strict social restrictions, you need to increase the cash availability and the money flows in your economy, because a lot of people are at homes, they don't spend much, and non-essential businesses are closed. So they ordered the central bank to increase the liquidity impact to avoid cash maybe shortages and credit risk. At the same time, they waived fees and taxes. For example, in UAE and Saudi Arabia, you have a lot of fees regarding the tourism sector and the industrial sector that were waived. For Turkey, it's a different story because they have a different economic model. Turkey decided to directly inject money into households to help people survive the current crisis, and this was around like $200 for salaries and around like $300 for pensions. At the same time, the Turkish government paid 3 million salaries for people affected from COVID-19, and it covers a lot of sectors. Now, the other type also of measures was also on fields such as ordering banks to give loans to SMEs, because we know that that small and medium enterprises are highly exposed to COVID-19 impact, and they need immediate support. So, for example, UAE and Saudi Arabia, they managed to allocate billions of dollars to support this kind of businesses to survive and go through the COVID-19. Now, after all what I said, we can say that the result is here. When you look to the MENA growth region, you understand that we are going through a recession after all. And you see, and you can see the numbers of growth, economic growth. Turkey is going to be -5, Libya -58, Lebanon -12, Morocco -3.7. So COVID-19 is having a huge impact on the economic growth in 2020. And even if we take a look to Egypt, it's the only country in the MENA region with a positive growth, which is expected to be around 2%. However, it feels like a recession for Egypt because it's a huge country with around 100 million people. So 2% is not good at all for Egypt. And this also can make us think about the general impact of COVID-19. Now, when we have this huge economic impact, it means also that the geopolitical and political dynamics are not going to be the same in the next few years. And we are going to see maybe an increase in radicalization, an increase in social unrest. Maybe some political regimes wouldn't make it because they don't have the political systems, the sophistication, the economic means to survive the tremendous crisis of COVID-19 and the oil prices. But tier one countries like UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Kuwait will come to the other side. They will mitigate the risk, but the huge economic damage will be there. So, and I would like to end up by a quick outlook of the oil price now. So we had a deal recently between OPEC plus countries and mainly between Saudi Arabia and Russia to reduce the oil production by 20%, which is the biggest oil cut in the history of OPEC. And this will last with us until 2022. However, this could be considered as a move in the right direction. The impact will be limited because there are two main things we need to monitor if we would like to understand the impact of the oil prices on the business outlook in the region. Because all we know that we are in a region where it is addicted to oil prices, and even GCC countries, they tried for years to diversify their economies, and they, to some extent, some places like Dubai succeeded in these policies, but others still a little bit far away from a diversification. So oil is very important for them, and the oil outlook says like, when we have China, right? China now is trying to go back online and to push to boost its economy after the COVID-19 hit. It's going to operate economic fully in the next few months, but at the same time, the Chinese economy relies heavily on exports. So when you have a problem, economic problems, recession in Europe, in the United States, which is going to be around 6%, I guess, and around the world, the Chinese economy also will slow down. And when you have the Chinese economy slow down, it means you will have low oil prices. And China imports around 40% of its oil from the region. So despite the significant cuts, the oil prices for the next year are going to be around $20 and $30. So yeah, I think that this is how I wrap up my presentation. And now we can have a Q&A session. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Walid. That's quite insightful presentation, and I can see the kind of questions which are pouring in. Let me take it one by one. So we have a question, Walid, which says that the outlook is dependent on the possibility of a vaccine in the third quarter of next year. But what is the scenario where there is a cure to COVID-19 released in 2020 itself? Not a vaccine, but a cure. So this could ease restrictions in countries, and would it be considered just like any other flu?
Yeah, I mean, the question is referring to the upside scenario. So the upside scenario, has very low probability. It's only scenario because companies and even individuals in this very uncertain times, they need scenario planning. They need to study and look closely to all the potential different trajectories that the COVID-19 could take and plan their business plans on that assumption. So especially one in the MENA region, which is very confusing region in terms of COVID-19 dynamics. So that scenario, the upside scenario, as I said, it's an optimistic scenario and at the same time, unlikely scenario. And even companies, they don't need contingency plans when we talk about the scenario. It's only there to show us a different path and to make us ready for a different path, but maybe less likely and maybe even highly unlikely. So the cure I'm talking about, I'm not a doctor, but the general consensus is like there are some laboratories, they are trying to introduce, and countries to introduce different types of treatments. But it's very early to judge if the treatments are going really to deeply impact the COVID-19 curve. Is it going to flatten it, to make it flat or not? We don't know yet. Some medical, healthcare people and experts say that some of them are giving encouraging results, but at the same time, we're seeing that the COVID-19 cases are increasing. So this will make this kind of cure or treatment, I prefer to call it treatment because it's not going to really have like decisive impact, but only reduce the number of maybe fatalities. So this is what I mean about a treatment. And Abu Dhabi medical authorities just announced like a few days ago that they are going to test also a new treatment. So those are encouraging results, but it's too early to see if they are going to have a very like high impact on the COVID-19 dynamics.
Okay. Great. The next question is actually in context to one of your slides, which you used in the initial part of your presentation, where you were telling us about the scenarios with tier 2 market and the tier 3 market. The question is referring to what is the DSOs and the strikes referring to in those slides?
So the DSOs basically means the non-payment risk. So for example, if you take tier 1 countries and you have Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait, these countries, they don't have an excellent DSOs, non-payment risk, but they have it average, which means it's still tolerable. Why? Because they have the financial resources. Although I should say that there is a risk, a lot of companies and maybe people also, especially small businesses, will feel the pain from non-payments or delayed payments in the next few months. Why? Because a lot of government at some point will reduce expenditure. And Saudi Arabia just announced a delay in projects, a delay in a number of considerable projects regarding its 2030 vision in entertainment, in tourism, in sports. And this will create a lot of problems for companies that are already involved in works or construction for these sectors. So, but when you look to tier 2 and tier 3 markets, it's easy to say that the non-payment risk or delayed payments will increase significantly, which means businesses are not being paid in time.
Okay, great. Walid, I have a question which says, how do you see post-COVID-19 life and general impact on oil consumption and their revenues?
Yeah, so it's very clear now that there is a link between COVID-19 and the oil crash. Also, although the main trigger, let's say, was somehow a deadlock between Saudi Arabia and Russia. And this is also very important development to keep in mind and monitor if we are in the oil business or being impacted by the oil revenues like all of us here in these GCC countries. So both countries didn't reach a deal, and then they reached a deal after a few weeks of high level of diplomacy and intense diplomacy, and also thanks to an American intervention. The American intervention was obviously justified by Trump election purposes because he wants to save the shale gas in the United States, and the owners of the shale gas pressed Trump to do so. And this also, people in this geographic zone in the United States, they are among the supporters of Trump. So Trump just acted as a political, let's say, survivor, and asked both countries to work together to reach a deal. Now, the outlook, as I said earlier, the outlook it's going to depend also on the scenarios. On the likely scenario, the base case scenario, that we have to adapt ourselves to low oil prices for the next 1 year, for the next year, for example, between $20 and $30. Why? Because the economic growth in the world is going to remain slow, which means a lot of sectors such as that use the oil, like the automotive sector, like maybe even travel, and all of these sectors are going to reduce because the business is not doing well, because consumption is not there. So they have to cut spending and to cut their operations. And when they cut their operations, it means they're not going to consume oil, which means reduced oil revenues for the GCC countries. Now, the impact of reduced oil revenues in the MENA countries, it's a deja vu situation. We've seen that in 2014 when we had the first oil crash, and price went down to around $20 or $30. Few months after that, and maybe 1 year after that, governments started reducing spending. And when you see the nature of the economic architecture here in GCC, when there is a reduction in government spending, it also touches the non-oil sectors, because it's still an oil-dependent economy. So when they reduce cuts, you will have a slump, you will have a decline in private consumption, in job creation, in hirings, and even in business opportunities. So that's what we're going to see in the next 2 years. In 2021, at the end of 2021, we believe that we are going to see, as the Chinese economy starts to recover, we're going to see a slight increase in oil prices.
Okay. I think it is there is a question which is in a similar context, wherein the audience wants to know how can GCC survive during this global drop in oil consumption?
Well, there's no question that GCC will survive. I mean, this obvious, when you take the economic and political, let's say, indicators, and I was talking about the resilience indicator earlier, which is a combination of healthcare capacity, fragility, political fragility, COVID-19 fatalities, fiscal health of the country, they will survive for sure, and they will be the best positioned to adapt themselves to post-COVID-19 world. Why? Because they have high financial, as I said, and political capacity to make swift changes. And we can just take a look at Dubai. Dubai started even years ago to go through a digital transformation. So, and these countries will go through huge the digital transformation at the government level in the next few years, because it means it reduces costs to cope with the current low oil prices environment and austerity measures, and at the same time to cope also to adapt the economy to COVID-19 outbreak. So they're going to survive for sure, and there is going to be a shift. It doesn't mean that the economic situation will be perfect. In the all MENA region and around the world, the economic pain of COVID-19 is going to be huge. But some countries will make it and start recovering, and some others will go, unfortunately, through very difficult times.
Agreed. Walid, I have many questions which are still there in the question box, but I have to keep a check on the time as well. Do you think we can take one more question before we call it off?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Sure. So I have one question probably which you can address, giving a broader view wherein the person is asking, the picture is gloomy. What can individuals do to mitigate the economic impact?
Well, you know, when we talk about businesses and we advise business people, they're also human beings, and we need also to address their uncertainty and their maybe stressful lives, and we are all going through this now. Nobody is like being protected from COVID-19 impact. However, I think as an individual advice, and it works also for businesses, make yourself important for your boss, for your company, and if you are a company and if you are a business, make yourself important to other businesses that you're engaged with. And this is how you maintain your business continuity. And then at the end of the year, maybe you will think about other strategies, maybe digital transformation strategy, maybe increasing home from work strategies. But for individuals, the most important thing is to economize cash as possible as you can. Keep cash. Cash is we call it cash is boss in crisis. So keep cash as much as you can and have different scenarios. Think about it. If it doesn't work this way, what should I do? Should I increase my skills in ICT, in softwares, in everything that makes me look important to my boss, or increase my chances to get another job?
Okay. All right. So for those who are inquiring about the recording of this webinar, yes, we will be sharing it with you possibly by tomorrow. And there are a lot of questions which I can still see. Walid, the chat box is still getting loaded with the questions. I'm afraid we have to keep a check on the time as well. So
yes, I think we passed the the half an hour that we planned to, and yeah, I hope that it was really beneficial and of value to everyone attending this webinar.
Indeed. So we'll try our best if we can reach out the questions. We can exchange it with Walid, or we can try and get inputs to the inquirers. And I would like to extend my thanks to Walid for coming up and presenting this webinar. And I'm sure, like, individually, we all have been benefited, and there are a lot of takeaways, be it resilience index for different market zones, or be it knowing the correlation of COVID-19 with the oil industry. There is quite a thoughtful insight which you presented, and even in this question answer session. On this note, take care of yourself, everyone. Thank you so much for coming online. Thank you, Walid, and stay safe.
Thank you, Ankita. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Appreciate. Take care.
Thank you.